let's begin with the book of Esther. And it says, and in the 12th month, that is the new month, well, that is the month of Adar. This is the name that was given to it while in Babylon during the exile. And it says, and in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, when the sovereign's command and his decree came to be done, on the day that the enemies of the Yahudim had waited to overpower them, it turned around so that the Yahudim overpowered those who hated them. We see, well, we read last week in the previous chapter that after Mordechai was given the ring, he was given permission to send a letter or sign a law in which the Yahudim were able to defend themselves against anybody who would come against them. And that made everything turn around from what it was pretty much happening at the moment, for everybody was waiting just to destroy the Yahudim because of the order written by Haman. But now that Haman was killed, now comes Mordechai and writes a new law, which brings salvation for the entire nation. In fact, that is a representation of how Haman, as the enemy, the accuser, tries to destroy the entire nation, but then Yahweh takes him out and puts the last and gives him authority in order to keep the chosen few alive. So the 12th month, the fact that it is the last month of the year, that connects with the fact that it would fulfill mainly this feast during the end times. That's why it would happen at the end of the year. And I already said feast, even though we haven't gotten to that verse, but it was because of this salvation that the Almighty gave us that we started to celebrate, or we were told according to the book, to celebrate the feast of Purim. And I will speak a little bit more about it in a moment. Then it says, the Yahudim assembled in their cities throughout all the provinces of sovereign Ahashverosh to lay hands on those who sought their evil, and no one stood against them, because fear of them fell upon all people. This is important because Yahweh promised us that if we were to follow his commandments and do what he says, the world, the nations would respect us and fear us. But if we were to do the opposite and sin against Yahweh, then the nations would take over our nation and destroy us. And that's why we were pretty much dispersed throughout all the nations of the world, and we are all scattered because of our sins, the sins of our ancestors as well. So here it says the fear of them fell upon all people. It is interesting when we think about it, because just a moment ago there was a law for all the people to come against Israel. It makes sense that Israel would be able to defend themselves, but they had the people of the nations, since they had the permission from the king himself through Haman, they were empowered to go and do so and thought they were going to be able, so they had no fear. But all of a sudden, another law is passed in which they are told, the Yahudim are told, to defend themselves and destroy anybody who comes against them. And then all of a sudden, fear comes upon the rest of the nations. But is more than just the change of law or the authority coming from the king. It is that just like the king represents the Almighty, if the authority would come from the king, and now this authority for the Yahudim as well, that would mean that it was Yahweh, the Almighty Creator, who was given authority to Israel to win the battle that they were going to fight. So this verse that is here highlighted represents what Yahweh said in Deuteronomy. regarding how we would fear the nations if we would sin against Yahweh, but then in the end times where we would turn back to Yahweh through Yahushua, the way of Yahweh, then he would make the nations fear us again. So we see here in the 12th month, meaning representing the end times, fear of them, the Yahudim, fell upon all people. So there a time will come pretty soon in which Yahweh will put in everybody's heart fear, respect, honor for those who are his people, because we know how this world treats those who are Yahweh's. So I'll continue. And all the officials of the provinces and the viceroys and the governors and all those doing the sovereign's work helped the Yahudim because the fear of Mordechai fell upon them. So another confirmation of that I was just saying, because not only fear of the Yahudim fell upon all people, but also fear of Mordechai fell upon them. Remember that Yahushua HaMashiach, who is represented here by Achashverosh, is the one who brought mercy. Yahushua came as the high priest. The last comes as the king to bring justice. So since he brings justice, he is connected to the fear of Yahweh. So that is in a way reason why even after Yahushua came, people remain the way they have, in the sense that a lot of people still do not fear Yahweh, because evil people do not appreciate mercy. In fact, they take advantage of it. So Yahushua came to bring mercy, so the enemy took it as a joke, and now that's why justice has to come and bring punishment. And that will bring that fear from all the nations. And that's why it mentions the fear of Mordechai fell upon them, because the fear of the last, who is represented by Mordechai, will fall upon them, because Yahweh will use the last to bring judgment, to bring the plagues, and will be given the authority to do so whenever he wants, even if in eternity when people won't sin, but he will have the power. And that is why the nations will remain in check pretty much. So, and that's why it's also written that he will rule with a rod of iron. So Mordechai, the fear of Mordechai fell upon them. For Mordechai was great in the palace of the sovereign, and his report spread into all the provinces. For this man Mordechai became greater and greater. Remember that he represents the last, who comes conquering and to conquer, who comes as King of Kings and Sovereign of Sovereigns. So just like here speaks about Mordechai, it is also what we see in scriptures, in the prophecies, what Yahweh promises the congregation, and pretty much what the new reality will be. We go from greater and greater honor and esteem. And verse 4 here in Hebrew says, because he was great, he was Gadol, right? Which connects with the fact that he comes as the king, the high or great. And it says, and the Yahudim struck all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, with killing and destruction, and did what they pleased to do. I'm sorry, I'll read it again. And the Yahudim struck all their enemies with their stroke of the sword, with killing and destruction, and did what they pleased to those who hated them. And in the citadel of Shushan, the Yahudim killed and destroyed 500 men. The Yahudim killed and destroyed 500 men. 500 in the sense of, the simplest way in which we could write it in Hebrew would be with a tav and a kuf. 400 and 100, and the Tav represents the end, well, amongst many other things, and the Kuf also represents the end of time, because in the pictographic alphabet is the sun going in the firmament, well, I'm sorry, in the horizon during the afternoon, pretty much. So it represents the end of time. It also represents the entrance to heaven. And it says, in the citadel of Shushan, the Yahudim killed and destroyed 500 men. So they brought an end to 500 men, and as well, it would represent the end of time when the few, which are the Yahudim, remember that the tribe, but that name would be used for those who would be in Mashiach. So when it comes to, when we find in scriptures, in any context, the name Israel next to Yahudah, then it is representing the many and the few. Israel and Yahudah. So Yahudah represents the few, those who won't experience death during the harvest. So they are the ones who will come after the wedding of the Lamb with Mashiach to fight at the war of Armageddon. So they will destroy all their enemies from all the nations who will have gathered to fight against them. It is interesting that all these nations that were gathering to fight against the Yahudim were 127 provinces. 120 makes reference to the last Jubilee, because there will be 120 Jubilees from Adam till the end, 6,000 years. And then 127, 7 like the last week of Daniel. The war of Armageddon will happen at the end of the last 7 years, after the last Jubilee. So Mashiach with the 144,000, the heavenly army, Revelation 19, will come to fight with all the nations of the world and will obviously win. So, and it says, and in the citadel of Shushan, the Yahudim killed and destroyed 500 men. And it says, in Parshandata, and Dalphon, and Asfata, or Aspata, and Orata, and Adalia, and Aridata, and Parmashta, and Arisai, and Aridai, and Wayezata, the 10 sons of Haman, son of Hamedata, the enemy of the Yahudim, they killed, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. Remember that the nations were given permission not only to kill the Yahudim, but also to take everything from them. Now, when the Yahudim took revenge because they were given authority to do so, they destroyed their enemies, but didn't take anything from them, even though obviously they were not going to use it anymore. But it was pretty much cursed, because they knew who to whom all those things belong, and as well the fact that it was not about possessions. It was about something, a spiritual war that was going on, and not only at the moment, but from the time of the Exodus with the Amalekites, and even before, Esav or Esau against Jacob. These 10 sons were the 10 sons of Haman, and I'll just check the names in just a moment. It's interesting that when it is said, mainly by Jews, that when the Nuremberg trials were being conducted, there were 10 men who were condemned to death, and it is believed in Judaism that those 10 men that were condemned through the Nuremberg trials were these 10 men who were reincarnated and worked for Hitler, and then were all sentenced to death. In fact, there is one story that says that when the trial was done, and now I'm trying to think if it was when the trial was done or when it was being executed. I believe it's the second. One of the 10 guys mentioned that was happening during the time of Purim, so that it was a second fulfillment. So one of the 10 guys somehow recognized that the time was the same as Purim, as kind of saying it is being fulfilled again. And I would want to look for, let me see if I can find the quote, just to say it right. Well, several sites that seem to be speaking about the same topic. I'll just read the first. Hopefully, the main part will appear there. It says the small letters Tav, Shin, and Zayin in the list of Haman's 10 sons of this chapter, Esther 9, that we're reading, with the combined numerical value of 707. So this would be, well, you see the 3 small letters and the large vav in the 10 sons of Haman with the Nuremberg trial in the background. So the background is the trial, but here we have what we see in the verse, obviously in Hebrew. Ish, Be'ed, well, each of the names right here, you can see it, and then this is a word that is not given translation in any language. I mean et, but the vav right at the beginning, right here at the right, is pretty much n. So here you see that there is a tav, and that is obviously in the scrolls. When they would copy the scrolls, when it came to the writing of Esther, they would write this letter tav, this letter shin, and this letter zayin smaller than the rest of the letters. So that had a meaning, and that is, here we have 400, then we have 300, so that's 700, and zayin, that's the 7, so 707. And they say it was making reference to the year 1946, according to the Jewish calendar. Obviously, well, I have mentioned how I don't agree with the year they have in the Jewish calendar. Jewish people themselves know that there are hundreds of years taken out of that calendar, so it has some issues, but that is how they correlate. As you can see here, the numerical value 707 are seen as the prophetic code hinting to the future hanging of the 10 Nazis convicted at the Nuremberg trials in the year 5707. Also, this is what I was mentioning, which Julius Stranger, I guess, or some Strain, I guess. I'd like to know how to pronounce exactly this, right? I may be having it wrong, but Julius Streicher declared as Purim Fest or Purim Feast 1946. So when they were going to be hanged, Julius got up and said Purim Feast 1946, as saying that they were being condemned as the 10 sons of Haman. It says, what is the origin of these small letters? Well, and then it continues with the whole thing. Sorry. And well, if you guys want to read the story, because it goes on and on, and I guess if you guys want me to read it, I can read more. For it, I believe it does mention everything. It seems to be on point. And there was another thing. Let me see if they mention it. There it is. Haman's daughter. The suicide of Hermann Goering is said to correspond to the death of Haman's daughter before the war, as recorded in Talmudic legend. So it is said that Haman's daughter, he had 10 sons and one daughter. It is said that her soul came back as a man, that man being this Herman, and that he was he would cross dress pretty much. So they say it was a reincarnation of Haman's daughter. And this is what they write in the Talmud. When he, referring to Haman, was going along the reed by Haman's house, leading Mordechai on the king's horse, his daughter, who was standing, I mentioned this in the previous study, remember? Well, hopefully you guys remember. His daughter, who was standing on the roof, saw him. She thought that the person riding was her father, and the one going before him was Mordechai. She took a chamber pot and threw it on her father's head. She dropped her eyes and saw that it was her father, and she fell from the roof to the ground and died. And this is what it means when it says in Esther 6:12, and Haman returned to his home in mourning and with his head covered. He was mourning for his daughter, and his head was covered with the contents of the chamber pot. So there are other connections that are found in this story of Esther and that of the Nazis and their hanging. So let's see if there's any other detail I would want to mention. Yeah, there are other details from that time and the connection that it has with the Feast of Purim and with the book of Esther in general, in case you want to check it out. So I guess you could just search for this right here, Purim Fest or Purim Feast, 1946, the Nuremberg trials, and the 10 sons of Haman. Well, remind me at the end of this chapter to read the names we see this at least 10 names right here. So there's a message as I always mention. So then it says, the 10 sons of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Yahudim, they killed, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. On that day, the number of those who were killed in the citadel of Shushan came before the sovereign. On that day, the number of those who were killed in the citadel of Shushan came before the sovereign. And the sovereign said to Sovereigness Esther, the Yahudim have killed and destroyed 500 men in the citadel of Shushan and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the sovereign's provinces? And what is your petition? And it is given to you. And what is your further request? And it is done. So we see the authority given to Esther, or the favor shown to her by the king, just like the favor that Mashiach would show or give the congregation to rule over the entire creation in eternity. So we see it here reflected in the way Ahasuerus speaks to Esther and asks from her what she wants in general regarding the enemies. And Esther said, if it pleases the sovereign, let it be given to the Yahudim who are in Shushan to do again tomorrow according to today's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the wooden structure. So give us another day to do the same. If there were 500, well, that would mean, a possibility of 1,000, right? Which connects with the fact that the war of Armageddon will happen at the beginning of the 1,000 years, the beginning of the millennium. And at the end of the millennium is the war of Gog and Magog. So there are two wars at the beginning and at the end. Well, one at the beginning, one at the end of the 1,000 years. Just like here, we have 500 that they killed on the first day, and now they want to do it again a second day, which also represents the double portion given to the chosen few, right? For she's asking pretty much for a double portion of punishment against their enemies, or double portion of enemies to fall. Other than that, she also asks for the 10 sons to be hanged, just like their father was, for everybody to see them and everybody to know what they did and what would happen to people who act the same way. It's interesting that they are 10. Haman represents Halel, who would use the 10 commandments, or in fact, the commandments to accuse humanity. So he tried to destroy the Yahudim by influencing the king and the nations. And then he falls, and with him, his 10 sons, which would represent the sons of the enemy who go against the commandments of Yahweh, who do not fulfill the 10 commandments, which are the essence of the rest of the commandments. We know that those 10 commandments, just like the 613 that we find in the Torah, are represented by the 10. The 10 are represented by 2, to love Yahweh with all your heart, all your mind, and all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And those 2 are represented or fulfilled in 1, which is what we see in 1 John 3:23, to believe in the name of the Son, Yahushua HaMashiach, and to love your neighbor as yourself. So then it says on verse 14, and the sovereign commanded that this to be done, and the decree was given in Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. And the Yahudim who were in Shushan also assembled on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they killed 300 men at Shushan, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. Once again, they did not lay a hand on the plunder. That was not the objective. And this time they killed 300. 300 plus the previous 500, that gives us 800. 800 men. And like I was saying, like if we were to, like, let's say, be at that time and not know what was going to happen the next day, one would say, when we got 500 today, maybe we can get 500 tomorrow. So through that idea, I mentioned how there will be a millennium, right? 1,000 years, one war at the beginning, one war at the end. We see that after the day passed, they killed only 300, which adds to 800, which is interesting because at the end of the millennium, we will enter the 8th millennium, right? And the 8th represents a new beginning. So they killed 800, and I'm sure there was a new beginning for the entire world after that, because 800 people who were wicked, who were evil, died. So the earth was cleansed, even though this was something that was very partial and just a representation of what will happen in the end times through the war of Armageddon. And then Gog and Magog, anybody from all the nations who may be a wicked person will be completely eradicated. So 300 men at Shushan. And the 300 is a letter Shin, the letter Shin, which represents fire, like the fire that is actually going to fall on the nations that come against us at the end of the millennium. Because that, well, I mentioned it as a war, but it's not truly a war because we won't have to fight. Yahweh will destroy them with fire that comes from heaven, Gog and Magog, at the end of the 1,000 years. So the second encounter that I was mentioning is Gog and Magog at the end of the 1,000 years, right before we begin the 8th millennium. And here we see that the second battle they fought, 300 of the enemies died. Just like Yahweh will use fire, represented by the Shin, which has the numerical value 300. Yahweh will destroy the enemies that second time of Gog and Magog with fire from heaven. And then it says, and the rest of the Yahudim in the sovereign's provinces assembled and stood for their lives, and to get rest from their enemies, and to kill, once again, And the rest of the Yahudim in the sovereign provinces assembled and stood for their lives, and to get rest from their enemies, just like at that time we would be, in the fulfillment of what I've been mentioning, entering the 7th millennium, which is the Shabbat, to get rest from all the enemies. And then in the 8th millennium, obviously we will get complete rest in every way, even though we won't have to fight that second one, I repeat, but there will still be a threat from the nations, which will be completely annihilated by the fire from heaven, and then from then on throughout eternity. So, and to get rest from their enemies. That's verse 16. Here it is. Rest from those who hated them. Or, well, yeah, rest from their enemies. I was thinking about a word that is very similar, but rest from their enemies. You see how rest is Noach, which is the name Noah, right? Noach. And Yahweh said that the coming of the Son of Man would be like the days of Noah, because it is the time when the rest will come, the rest which is the Shabbat, the 7th millennium. So, and the rest of the Yahudim in the sovereign provinces assembled and stood for their lives, and to get rest from their enemies, and to kill 75,000 of their enemies. 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. Once again, they did not lay a hand on the plunder. In this case, it is referring to all the provinces apart from Shushan. And in total, there were 75,000 of their enemies. The 75 connects to the year in which Yahweh called Abraham to do his ministry, pretty much, to start his ministry at 75, to cross the river and become the Hebrew, he who passes or who crosses over. Also, 75 connects, depending on the translation you see, to the number of people, or depending on how you count them, number of people that entered Egypt, that came from Jacob. So it depends on the translation and also the way you count it, pretty much. So that's why there are two different translations. Obviously, one of them is not the original, and that was an issue from the scribes that I have mentioned. The Septuagint has 75. The Masoretic text has 70. And the Septuagint is older, even though it's Greek. So that's an issue right there, but well, a pro and a con. So 75,000 of the enemies. And I was mentioning that because if there were 75 who entered Egypt from Jacob, and now we see 75,000 of their enemies falling at the end, it is like saying all of the enemies from the 70 nations, all of the enemies of Israel. In fact, I mean, in a way, we could say that all the enemies from all the nations will be revealed to be destroyed. That's why 75. 70 makes reference to the nations, the number of nations at the beginning that came from Noach, which actually the name is found there when it says rest. 70 nations came from Noach. And then the number 5 is the number of revelation. In fact, 70 is the letter Ayin, which is an eye. And the 5 is a letter Hey, which is a window, represents revelation. So the eye will see all the enemies from all the nations. And to kill 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. That was on the 13th day of the month of Adar. And on the 14th day, they rested. And on the 14th, they rested in it and made it a day of feasting and gladness. So this is when they made the feast of Purim. And I'll show something here. Because in the true calendar, every day is the same every year. I mean, I'll show in a moment what I mean. Unlike in the Gregorian calendar, in which, let's say, a person's birthday, one day may be a Monday, the next year, the same day of the year, or meaning his birthday may be on a Sunday, or well, different day. In the true calendar, every day is the same number. Everything is perfect, organized. So every year, for instance, in this case, you see the 12th month, Adar, the 13th, they fought, we just saw it, but they also fought in the time of the Maccabean, and they said to celebrate a feast on that day. So that's why on the 13th you have here Maccabean, the Maccabees. But this is the day that the Israelites also fought with the nations in the time of Ahashverosh. So that shows that this is a day of war, because it already happened twice, and Yahweh saved us twice. Blessed be his name, and he might do it again, or there might be another fulfillment around this time or in this day. Then on the 14th, for it said that they fought on the 13th, and then on the 14th they rested, right? Because the 14th, as you can see, is a Shabbat. So we could say even that this is a confirmation, one of many, of our calendar, because we see that it was a Shabbat. The 14th of the 12th month, we go back and it says that was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested in it and made it a day of a feast and gladness. 17, and they used the word Noach again. So, but the Yahudim who were at Shushan assembled on the 13th day, as well as on the 14th day, and on the 15th day they rested in it and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore, and that was because of what Esther asked for, right? For them to have another day to avenge themselves from their enemies. So therefore, the Yahudim of the villages who dwelt in the unwalled towns were making the 14th day of the month of Adar a good day of gladness and feasting, and for sending portions to one another. Sending portions to one another. So this is the only, and I think this might be important to understand, in order to have it as a well, a piece of information useful when talking to a Christian, for instance, because in the entire scriptures, this is the only verse where a feast is mentioned in which we were told, not necessarily by Yahweh, although we could say through the Ruach, because the book, I believe, is inspired, or it is prophetical, but it was the people, because of the event, that made it a tradition to give each other gifts. But this is in Purim, on the 12th month, right? Which is interesting because Christians celebrate Christmas on the 12th month, but of the Gregorian calendar, which is not the 12th month, is the 10th month. That's why it's December, as in Spanish, diez, December, right? So it is not the true 12th month, December. It is not the true birth of Mashiach. And we know that they celebrated Saturnalia and other things around that time, the winter solstice, for instance. This is the only feast, and it happens on the 12th month of the true calendar, but not on the 25th, but on the 14th and 15th, because since there were so many people, so many nations, the message, as we're about to see, did not get to some until it was the next day. So that's why it was decided to celebrate both days. And that is the reason why you see Purim on the 14th and on the 15th, those 2 days. And that, I repeat, is the only feast mentioned in scriptures in which people were to send portions to one another or gifts, right? Verse 19. And that is if you wanted to celebrate it, right? It's not like it's a commandment from Yahweh. I want to make that clear. It is just a day in which you could do it because we celebrate a very important time. And Mordechai wrote these matters and sent letters to all the Yahudim who were in all the provinces of sovereign Ahashverosh, both near and far, to establish among them to perform the 14th and the 15th days of the month of Adar yearly. Now, you see how Mordechai, a representation of the last, so that would mean that something will transpire in the end times. It will be amazing if it happens during Purim, but something will happen that most likely the last will establish as a day to remember for the rest of eternity. Something new, because if during the first Exodus is when we got most of the feasts, or we could say all, but then I mean all because they were told to us in Leviticus 23, but then it was until the people entered the land 40 years later that some of the feasts were able to be celebrated. And then we get Hanukkah and Purim. And as I have said, Hanukkah is a reflection of the feast of Sukkot. And in this case, Purim is a reflection of the day of Yom Kippur. So those two feasts that were added were actually reflections of previous feasts. So in a way, confirmations of the fact that those two feasts are important and are to be celebrated and guarded in the sense of keeping watch for those times. And I will show it in just a second. So we have in Hebrew, well, in the scriptures, we find that Yom Kippur is called Yom HaKippurim, which is a day of atonements, the day of atonements. And I say atonements because it is plural, as you can see here, the im. And I am missing a word, a letter at the bottom. HaKippurim. You see, they write as Yom Kippur, but it says HaKippurim, atonements. So this is day. Let's take the article away, Yom Kippurim. But in the scriptures, repeat, it says Yom HaKippurim. I wanted to remove it just to show something in a simpler way. If we separate here, we have that it says day, which is like Purim. In fact, I guess we could add the letter hey and it would still be the same. Day that is like Purim. So in Yom HaKippurim, we have the word day, which is like Purim. So Yom Kippur is a day which is like Purim in a way. We could say that there is a connection between the day of Yom Kippur when they will kill the two witnesses and the day when the chosen few will, for instance, be harvested because they will be transformed due to the fact that the first and the last died for their soul and their body. So now soul and body can be transformed to enter the new reality. Because of Yom Kippur, the chosen few will be atoned for, as we also see confirmed in the book of Daniel 9 at the end, regarding the atonement at the very end when the two witnesses die. And like I was saying, in a way, it connects to the war of Armageddon. So it could be said that the heavenly army will be able to defeat their enemies because of what was done on Yom Kippur. Remember that on Yom Kippur, and that is to show that it includes Mashiach Yahushua. On Yom Kippur, they would sacrifice 3 animals: a male goat, an ox, and a lamb. And a ram. So the male goat represented Yahushua HaMashiach. The ox represents the second manifestation of Yahweh on this earth. And the ram represents Eliyahu. They would kill the male goat and the ox and mix their blood and use it for atonement. And the ram was as an offering, peace offering. So that is the sacrifice of Mashiach and the two witnesses. Mashiach, the witness like Moshe, who is the last, so first and last, and Eliyahu to fulfill Yom Kippur, and so that the chosen few are atoned for and are able to go and fight and win the war of Harmagedon. To establish among them to perform on the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar yearly. To remember, as the days on which the Yahudim had rest from their enemies, as the month which was turned from sorrow to joy for them. You see how, let's say, and it happens a lot, but let's say just in this context, you see how this translation does not fit Chodesh as new moon, because he has mentioned new moons many times that obviously we're not a new moon. And we know that it is referring to the month. And if the month is supposed, according to them who follow the moon, it's supposed to begin with the new moon, then why does it say the 14th and the 15th, which is at the half of the month? So how can it be half of the month and new moon at the same time? It's a complete contradiction. Two different things. So is on the month, as the month. When it comes to us, you see how the month starts. And in this case, it was one of the years in which they synchronized. So the new moon was the day right before, right here. But you see how on the 15th was the full moon. So that means that was the new moon right here. So this is the full moon, new moon, another full moon. That was an eclipse, then new moon. But the moon starts to stays back 10 days every year. So you see how it starts falling back. That is new moon, new moon, new moon. And in this year, the new moon will be on the 22nd. But a couple years later, there will be a time, and we will see the calendar when the new moon will be on the 15th. So it could be a new moon on the 15th, but that is because the month does not start with the new moon. Because if it was as they said, and the new moon was at the beginning of the month, the other new moon would be around here. It could never be on the 15th. So I hope that was understood. So as the days on which the Yahudim had rest from their enemies, and as the month which was turned from sorrow to joy for them, and from mourning to a good day, that they should, and from mourning to a good day, just like I was mentioning the harvest, people will be scared, right? It will be the last test of faith. Some will be, I'm hoping that most will be fine and strong, but I don't doubt some will be kind of afraid or scared of going through it. So that fear will turn into joy, or that mourning, thinking that they will die, will become life during the transformation. Turn from sorrow to joy for them, and from mourning to a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, of sending portions to one another and gifts to the poor. Once again, sending portions to one another and gifts to the poor on the 14th and the 15th of Adar. And interesting that those 2 days represent the double portion of the last, the few in the end times, also represents the first and the last. 14, the numerical value of David, for the first and last would be the root and the branch of David. And the 15th is the numerical value of the name Yah, Yud Hey, the hen, and the revelation or the work, the deeds of Mashiach and the revelation through his wisdom. So, and the Yahudim undertook to do as they had begun and as Mordechai had written to them. Because Haman, son of Hamedata, the Agagite, the adversary of all the Yahudim, had plotted against the Yahudim to destroy them. This is the point, or the key. And had cast Pur, that is the lot, to crush them and to destroy them. Had cast Pur. That's verse 24. Right here, because Haman, son of Hamedata, ki Haman ben Hamedata, Hagagi, Soreir, Kal Hayahudim, Hashav, Al Hayahudim. Well, let me just get to the point. Vehipil Pur, and he threw Pur. You see the word there, Pur, which is Lut. You see is the word that we find here. If we take away this, oh, come on. Did it by mistake. So here it is, Pur, right? For some reason, it's not translating, doesn't matter. And if you add the Yud and the Mem to make it plural, Lutz, we get the Feast of Purim. Oh, there you go, right here. So it says, because Haman, son of Hamedata, the Agagite, the adversary of all the Yahudim, had plotted against the Yahudim to destroy them, and had cast Pur, that is the Lot, to crush them and to destroy them. So that's why it was called Purim. But when she came before the sovereign, he commanded by letter that his evil plot, which Haman had plotted against the Yahudim, should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the wooden structure. So the punishment that they gave Mashiach is pretty much, as we are seeing here, a similar, well, what could I put it? Because of what they made Mashiach go through, now those who are against them will have to go through something similar, and I'm sure worse, because it will be eternal. Mashiach just had to go for a moment, through it for a moment, or for a day, let's say, because I'm not trying to take away anything from all that pain. But when she came before the sovereign, he commanded by letter that his evil plot, which Haman had plotted against the Yahudim, should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the wooden structure. So it's pretty much the same that will happen to Satan and his angels, and obviously all those who follow him. Therefore, they called these days Purim, after the name Pur. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter that they had seen concerning this matter and what had come upon them, the Yahudim established and imposed it upon themselves and upon their seed and all who should join them, that without fail they should perform these 2 days every year according to their writing and at their appointed time. So you see how it wasn't given directly by Yahweh, but it was given because of a miracle given by Yahweh. So it is in order for us not to forget how good Yahweh is, how good he has been to us, and not to forget that he will save us at the end from all our enemies. So I believe is amazing how Christians defend their pagan feasts. They love them so much, which is pretty much because of tradition, because of some good memories that they may have. But you can always make good memories. That should be the point of every day, to leave a good memory in every day, not just a certain day of the whole year. But if we are going to choose certain days, then we should choose those which Yahweh made for it. So he is the one that should tell us, you should celebrate this day, you should celebrate that day, as we see it here. So my point is that if one believes in the scriptures, why should one go and celebrate different feasts that are not in scriptures and not celebrate those which are? And some may say, no, those feasts are for the Jews. However, look how it says here, and all who should join them, all who follow the same covenant, all who follow the same mighty one, creator, all who should join them. The Yahudim established and imposed it upon themselves and upon their seed. So if we are their seed, then it was imposed upon us and we should follow it. And all who should join them, those who may not be Yahudim by flesh, by blood, but they are by spirit because of Yahushua and the new covenant, then they should also remember it, that without fail they should perform or guard, remember these two days every year, according to the writing and at their appointed time. Very important. These 2 days every year. So we should do it according to the writing, not only according to what we were told, but also according to the correct time. And for that, we would need the correct calendar. That is verse 27. Shnei Hayamim. Shnei Hayamim. This word, which is two, since this starts with the letter Hey, there was a mem right here, but it was taken out because of the way it is written in Hebrew. So we have this word as two, Shin Nun Yud. That will be 360, which is interesting because that is the base of the calendar. 360 days plus 4 of changing the seasons. So that's why also you see how this is Shani or Shanae, but we could see it as Shani. And remember that year is Shana. So you can see how Shana, even by name, has 2 parts, right, of 6 months each. That represents the 2 pillars, first and last, Yakin and Boaz, the entrance to the temple. 6 months and 6 months. 6 is a numerical value of the Vav, which is the men, a man standing up, and man was made on the 6th day. So 6 months and 6 months has 2 men that would come to fulfill the feasts of the first half and the second half of the year. Now we have 2 days. Shnei Hayamim. And like I said, it represents the double portion and the coming of the second one in the end times. Remember, Ben Yamin is also understood as Ben Yomim, which means son of days. Here is 2 days. So it could be seen also as the second, which comes at the end of days. So as I was saying, let's see where we were. Therefore, they call these days Purim after the name Pur. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter that they had seen concerning this matter, I had already read that, right? To join them, that without fail, they should perform these 2 days every year according to their writing and at their appointed time. And that these days should be remembered and performed throughout every generation, every clan, every province, every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Yahudim, and that the remembrance of them should not cease from their seed. Now it's sad, well, but it should be understood once Yahweh gives us understanding, revelation regarding who we are and who they are, then it is interesting to see how the Jews celebrate Purim in Israel, for it is like Sodom and Gomorrah. It is amazing what is seen over there during that feast. If you guys want to investigate a little bit, just look on YouTube for the Feast of Purim in Israel and you'll see a little bit. It's not about Yahweh, it's not about deliverance, it's not about the joy of being free because of Yahweh's will or all that we see in this book, but it is all about getting drunk and a bunch of things, thinking that day, I guess they think it is not a sin to sin on that day or something like that. So yeah, it's weird. And sovereignness Esther, the daughter of Abihail, with Mordechai, the Yahudi, wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter about Purim. I think I have read all this already, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Yahudim, and that the remembrance of them should not cease from their seed. And sovereigness Esther, the daughter of Abihail, with Mordechai, the Yahudi, wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter about Purim. This is interesting because it mentions not only Esther, which represents both the congregation and the Ruach HaKodesh, my father who is powerful. Then it says Mordechai, the Yahudi, which represents the last, wrote with all authority to confirm. Remember that the last comes to confirm the covenant. This second letter, remember that the last comes as second, about lots, about the two right, the Purim, and about those 2 days that I already mentioned, and that is verse 29, Hasod Hasheinit. Second. Then it says, and Mordechai sent letters to all the Yahudim, to the 127 provinces of the reign of Ahashverosh, words and peace and truth, to establish these days of Purim at their appointed times, as Mordechai the Yahudi and sovereigness Esther had established for them, and as they had established for themselves and their seed concerning matters of their fastings and lamenting, meaning that they should feast, not fast. And the decree of Esther established these matters of Purim, and it was written in a book. And we could say here we have the book that writes about it. And the decree of Esther established these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. And that's how the chapter ends. And here we have the translation of the 10 names, which I wanted to see, the 10 names of Haman's sons. And we have, I'm just going to mention the 10 meanings. We already saw the names. And it will be, he who was given by prayer will be dripping. That would, the scripture talks about, for instance, I mean, one of the interpretations of the word dripping would be like drops of knowledge, like how the Almighty gives us little by little the understanding, the wisdom, right? So he who was given by prayer will give, right, his ministry, his teaching through dripping, as a dripping, to entice those who are gathered, right, to call those who will be gathered during the harvest, and to give fruitfulness, or will drip knowledge to entice those who are gathered and bring fruitfulness. When they shall be drawn up to Yahweh through the lion of the decree, who is superior, the lion of my banners. That is obviously the lion of Yehudah, right? That would refer to the lion of Yehudah. It's interesting that it mentions the lion of the decree and then the lion of my banners. That would be like first and last, once again. He who came and made the decree, the covenant, and then the one who comes to confirm it, and who comes with a banner. And that is interesting because in Isaiah, Mashiach, Yahushua the first is called a banner. So the last has a banner, Nisi, Yahweh Nisi, Yahweh is my banner, through Yahushua, who is at the right hand of the Father, just like a flag would be in the heavens, right? Well, in the sky, as high above as you can have it, so everybody can see it. And then he says, the lion is enough. That's interesting. You see, Aridai is the name, Aridai. Ari is my lion. Dai is enough, as in Shaddai, right? There is enough. Yesh Dai, there is enough. Shaddai there is enough in him to do anything. That's why Shaddai is omnipotent. So it will be the lion who comes to bring the end, meaning who says when enough is enough. But also the fact that first and last will become one. The lion of the decree, the lion of my banners. The lion is enough. He is the Shaddai, right, as well. And then comes the last name, which would be strong as the wind. And wind, remember, is Ruach. So I'll say it all again. And it says, he who was given by prayer, meaning Mashiach first and last, will come giving knowledge through dripping, right? And remember, that word is connected through scriptures to the giving of knowledge through the Ruach. So he who was given by prayer would give knowledge as a dripping to entice the ones who are gathered, for them to be fruitful when they shall be drawn up by Yah, right? And during the harvest, by the lion of the decree, who is superior, the lion of my banners, the lion who is enough, who is strong as the spirit, as the wind. Yes, so we see through the meanings of the names of these 10 men, a revelation of the coming of Yahweh as Mashiach, as the lion of Yehudah, therefore to bring judgment, to defend the congregation, those who will be drawn up from the enemy, from their adversaries, as we saw in the book, a representation of the coming of the last. For Yahushua came as the lamb, now the last comes as the lion.